The text message arrived at 5:42 on a gray October morning. My daughter sent it while I was still standing barefoot in my kitchen in Spokane, Washington, holding a cup of cheap coffee that had already gone cold. "Mom, the mortgage is due tomorrow. Why haven't you transferred the money yet?" There was no good morning, no how are you feeling, no hello, just the demand. I stared at the phone long enough for the screen to dim. Then another message appeared. "Also, don't forget you're coming Saturday. The house is a mess again. And bring groceries. The kids like the organic stuff." My hands started trembling. Not from age, not from weakness. From something deeper, something that had been building quietly for years. But before I tell you what happened next, you need to know who I am. Because the woman who received that message and the woman I became afterward are not the same person. My name is Margaret Holloway. I am 63 years old, and for most of my life, I believed motherhood meant disappearing. I raised my daughter alone after my husband died in a logging accident when she was 11. His name was Daniel Holloway, and he had been the kindest man I ever knew. When he died, the world didn't pause to let me grieve. Bills still came, groceries still had to be bought, and my daughter Claire still needed shoes that fit. So I worked. Not glamorous jobs, not careers people brag about at Thanksgiving dinner. I cleaned hotel rooms in a roadside motel off Interstate 90. I scrubbed bathroom tiles until the smell of bleach burned my lungs. I pushed carts through endless hallways, carrying sheets that smelled like strangers. At night, I worked at a diner called Maple Spoon. Grease popped on the grill, coffee burned my fingers. Truckers came in after midnight and left crumbs and tips that barely covered bus fare home. During winter, I also took shifts stocking shelves at a grocery store. 3 jobs, 16-hour days. All so Claire could have something better. And she did. She went to college at Washington State University, the first person in our family to do it. I still remember the pride swelling in my chest the day she graduated. She wore a crimson cap and gown. I cried through the entire ceremony. I thought that was the finish line. I thought the years of struggle had finally led somewhere good. But life has a strange way of twisting your expectations. 3 months after Claire got married to a man named Nathan Caldwell, she came to my small house carrying tears and a story about hardship. Nathan had just started a small tech company. Money was tight. They had student loans. They needed help just for a few months. Just until things stabilized. Just a little help. And of course I said yes, because mothers say yes. I gave them the savings I had built over 10 years. Money meant to replace the collapsing roof of my house. $5,000. Claire hugged me. She cried. She promised it was temporary, but temporary has a funny habit of stretching into forever. First it was rent. Then groceries, then a car repair, then childcare when the babies came, then their mortgage when they bought a house bigger than anything I had ever lived in. And somehow, without noticing when it happened, I stopped being Claire's mother. I became her safety net, her backup plan, her silent investor. Every Saturday, I drove 40 minutes to their suburban house outside Seattle. I cleaned their kitchen. I washed piles of laundry taller than my knees. I cooked meals that lasted them all week. I babysat my grandkids while Claire and Nathan went out for dinner dates or wine tastings. Sometimes they thanked me. Most times, they didn't. And I told myself the same lie over and over again. This is what mothers do. Until the morning that text message arrived. "The mortgage is due tomorrow. Why haven't you transferred the money yet?" I looked around my tiny kitchen. Paint peeling off the cabinets. A bucket on the floor, catching rainwater from the ceiling leak. My bank balance was $823, my entire monthly Social Security check. And suddenly, something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet fracture that would soon split my entire life in two. Because that morning, for the first time in 40 years, I asked myself a question that terrified me. What if love isn't supposed to feel like this? And that question would eventually lead me to uncover a truth about my own daughter that would destroy the illusion I had lived inside for decades. But I didn't know that yet. Not until the night I accidentally opened Claire's email. 3 nights after that text message, rain was hammering the roof hard enough to wake me. Water dripped steadily into the metal bucket beside my bed. Drip, drip, drip. I lay there staring at the ceiling stain, spreading slowly like a bruise. Claire's mortgage payment was $600. My roof repair estimate was $3,000. I had postponed it for 2 years because every spare dollar somehow ended up in her account. The thought sat heavy on my chest. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Claire. "Mom, you forgot to send it." I stared at the glowing screen. Then I did something unusual. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my banking app and looked at my transaction history. Scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. My stomach tightened. In the last year alone, I had transferred over $11,000 to Claire and Nathan. $11,000. From a woman living on Social Security. For a moment, I thought I must have misread something, but the numbers didn't change. That night, sleep never came back, and in the quiet hours before dawn, a strange memory surfaced. 2 weeks earlier, Claire had asked me to help fix Nathan's laptop. I used to be decent with computers from my years working front desk at the motel. When I repaired it, I logged into their email to test the connection. I remembered seeing something strange then, an email thread. At the time, I ignored it, but now the memory returned like a whisper I couldn't silence. So the next morning, I drove to Seattle under gray skies and steady rain. Claire and Nathan weren't home. They had given me a spare key years ago to help whenever they needed. Or, more accurately, whenever they demanded. I walked into their warm house, smelling expensive candles and fresh paint. Their living room alone was larger than my entire home. On the kitchen counter sat Nathan's laptop. My hands hesitated, then I opened it. The password was still the same, Claire's birthday. Inside the email inbox, I searched the phrase, mortgage. Several messages appeared. One thread from 3 months earlier caught my eye. It was between Nathan and Claire. I clicked. Nathan wrote, "Don't worry about the mortgage this month. Your mom will cover it again." Claire replied, "Yeah, she always does. Honestly, it's easier than cutting our spending." Then another message. "Maybe we should ask her to help with the kitchen remodel too. She feels guilty if she says no." My throat went dry. I scrolled further. Claire wrote again. "Sometimes I feel bad, but she likes feeling needed. Besides, she barely spends money anyway." I sat frozen at the kitchen table. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, my world quietly collapsed. For years, I believed my daughter needed help, believed she was struggling, believed my sacrifices mattered. But according to these emails, my entire role in her life had become something else: convenience. I closed the laptop slowly. My hands felt numb. But the worst part wasn't the money. It wasn't even the manipulation. It was the casual tone in her words, as if draining her mother's savings was as normal as ordering takeout. I drove home that afternoon in silence, and that night, sitting in my dim living room, listening to rain drip through the ceiling, I realized something terrifying. My daughter didn't need my help. She needed my obedience. And for the first time in my life, I wondered what would happen if I stopped giving it. What I didn't know yet was that the moment I said no would ignite a chain of events involving lawyers, a will, and a secret my daughter never expected me to uncover. And when that secret surfaced, the balance of our entire family would shift forever. The first time I said no to my daughter, my hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down. It was a Thursday afternoon in late October. Wind pushed dry leaves across my porch, and the air smelled like rain and wood smoke from the neighbor's fireplace. My phone rang. Claire. I knew exactly why she was calling. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Mom." Her voice sounded cheerful, almost sweet. "Did you send the mortgage payment yet? The bank usually takes a day to process." I stared at the crack running across my kitchen wall. "No, Claire." There was a pause. What do you mean, no? I mean, I didn't send it. Silence stretched across the line. Then, a short laugh. Mom, stop joking. Nathan already scheduled the automatic payment assuming you would cover it. I took a slow breath. Claire, I can't do it this month. Another pause, longer this time. What do you mean you can't? My check is $800, I said. I have bills too. Her voice sharpened. Mom, you've always helped. Why are you suddenly acting like this? Because I realized something, I said quietly. What? You and Nathan make more money in a month than I see in a year. The line went completely silent. For a moment, I wondered if she had hung up. Where did you hear that? I didn't answer. Instead, I said something I had never said to my daughter in 63 years. I'm not sending any more money. Claire's tone changed instantly. Cold, defensive. Are you serious right now? Yes. Mom, the mortgage is due tomorrow. I know. We're going to get hit with late fees. You'll manage. Her breathing grew louder in the receiver. What happened to you? Nothing happened. No, Mom, something definitely happened. You're acting crazy. Crazy. That word landed like a slap. For years, I had cleaned her house, paid her bills, sacrificed my health, and now that I finally refused one request, I was crazy. Claire, I said calmly, I'm tired. Tired of what? Tired of being your emergency fund. Another long silence. Then she spoke slowly. Wow, just wow. Nathan and I have supported you emotionally for years, and this is how you repay us? I almost laughed. Supported me. Claire, when was the last time you asked if I was okay? That's not fair. Isn't it? She sighed loudly. Fine. If you want to be selfish, that's your choice. But don't expect us to rescue you when you run out of money. Rescue me. The irony was almost painful. Claire hung up. I sat there for a long time staring at my silent phone. Part of me expected guilt to swallow me whole. Instead, I felt something strange. Relief. For the first time in decades, I had drawn a line. But boundaries have consequences. 3 days later, Saturday morning, my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Claire stood there. Behind her were my 2 grandsons, Evan and Luke. They ran forward immediately. Grandma! They hugged me tightly, and my heart cracked in 2. Claire stepped inside without asking. Mom, we need to talk. I knew that tone, negotiation disguised as concern. The boys ran into the living room to watch television. Claire folded her arms. You embarrassed me in front of Nathan. How? Because I had to explain to him why you refused to help us. I looked at her. You mean you had to explain why your retirement plan stopped working? Her eyes narrowed. That's not funny. I'm not joking. Mom, we are family. Exactly. Family doesn't treat each other like an ATM. Claire's face flushed red. You're being dramatic. No, I said quietly. I'm being honest. She looked around my small living room, peeling paint, old couch, the bucket catching rainwater. Mom, you've always been fine living like this. That sentence told me everything. She had never noticed. Or worse, she had noticed and simply didn't care. You know what your problem is? Claire continued. You've been listening to someone filling your head with nonsense. Maybe I'm finally listening to myself. Claire grabbed her purse. Fine, but don't expect us to keep visiting if you're going to treat us like this. She called the boys. We're leaving. Evan looked confused. But we just got here. Now. They followed her out the door. Before leaving, Claire turned back once more. You've changed, Mom. Yes. And the moment the door closed behind her, I realized something else. She wasn't upset about losing her mother. She was upset about losing her supplier. But that wasn't the worst part. Because a week later, I would discover something hidden inside my late husband's will. Something Claire had been hoping I would never find. And when I did, everything changed. 2 weeks passed without a single call from Claire. No messages, no visits, no pictures of the boys. Nothing. At first, the silence hurt. I would pick up my phone out of habit, expecting to see her name, but the screen stayed empty. And slowly, that silence began to feel peaceful. Saturday mornings no longer meant driving 40 minutes to clean someone else's house. My time belonged to me again. I fixed small things around my home, repaired a cabinet hinge, cleaned the gutters. And one afternoon, I finally climbed into the attic to look for an old toolbox Daniel had left behind before he died. Dust coated everything. Boxes stacked like forgotten memories. While searching, I found something else, a small wooden chest. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were Daniel's old documents, insurance papers, photographs, and an envelope marked Holloway Family Trust. I frowned. Trust? I didn't remember Daniel ever mentioning one. Curiosity pushed me to sit down on the attic floor and open the envelope. Inside were several legal papers and a letter from a law firm in Portland. The date stopped my breath. 2 months before Daniel died. My eyes moved slowly across the page. Daniel had created a trust. For me and for Claire. But the conditions made my stomach twist. According to the document, the trust held the rights to 20 acres of timberland Daniel inherited from his father in Oregon. Land I barely remembered. The value listed on the document was shocking. Almost $1 million. My heart began pounding. Why had no one ever told me this? Then I saw the final clause. The inheritance would transfer to Claire only after my death, unless I chose to sell or transfer the property during my lifetime. Which meant something simple. The land was legally mine. Not Claire's, not Nathan's, mine. My hands trembled as I kept reading. Another paper revealed the reason the trust existed. Daniel had written it in his own handwriting. Margaret, if something happens to me, I want you protected. Use the land however you need. Sell it if life gets hard. Just promise me one thing. Never let anyone pressure you into giving away your future. I sat in that dusty attic staring at the paper. Daniel had died 12 years ago, and somehow this document had been buried under boxes and forgotten. But suddenly something made sense. Claire had always been strangely interested in that land. She occasionally asked about it, but she always framed it as concern. Mom, have you looked into selling that property yet? Mom, maybe you should transfer it early to avoid taxes. Mom, Nathan knows a lawyer who can help with the paperwork. At the time, I thought she was trying to help. Now the pieces clicked together. Claire believed that land would eventually be hers, and she had spent years draining my savings while waiting for it. My chest tightened. Had she known the truth all along? Had she been counting on my death to inherit it? The thought made me feel sick. But before I could process it further, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. Mrs. Holloway, this is David Kramer from Northridge Development. My stomach dropped. Yes? We recently received an inquiry from your daughter Claire Caldwell regarding the potential sale of your Oregon property. The room began spinning. I never contacted you about selling land, I said slowly. There was a pause. Oh. Well, that's strange, because she indicated she had authority to negotiate on your behalf. My fingers tightened around the phone. And in that moment, I realized something horrifying. Claire hadn't just been using my money. She had already begun trying to sell the one thing Daniel left to secure my future. Without telling me. Without my permission. And that was the moment I decided my daughter was about to learn the most expensive lesson of her life. I did not sleep that night. After the phone call from the developer, I sat at my kitchen table long after midnight, staring at Daniel's letter while rain tapped softly against the windows. My daughter had tried to sell land that didn't belong to her. The thought circled my mind again and again, each time feeling more unreal. But the evidence was clear. Claire had contacted a development company pretending she had authority over my property. Which meant one thing. She thought the land was already hers. Or worse, she assumed I would never notice. At 6 a.m, I called the number printed on the trust documents, a law firm in Portland. A calm male voice answered. Keller and Maddox Legal Group. My name is Margaret Holloway. I said carefully. I believe your firm prepared a trust for my husband, Daniel Holloway, 12 years ago. There was a pause while the receptionist searched records. Yes, Mrs. Holloway, that trust is still active. How may we assist you? I swallowed. My daughter recently contacted a development company, claiming she could negotiate a sale of the property in Oregon. I need to know if she has any legal authority to do that. The answer came quickly. No, she does not. Your husband established the trust with you as the sole controlling beneficiary during your lifetime. No one else can sell, transfer, or negotiate the property without your direct approval. A strange calm spread through me. So Claire had been bluffing, pretending ownership, acting behind my back. Thank you, I said. Before hanging up, the lawyer added something unexpected. Mrs. Holloway, there is something else you should know. Yes? Your husband included a secondary instruction within the trust. I felt my heart beat harder. What kind of instruction? If any party attempts to illegally transfer or manipulate ownership of the property before your passing, the inheritance clause automatically becomes void. I blinked. Meaning? Meaning your daughter would permanently lose any future claim to the property. The room felt suddenly very quiet. So Claire had unknowingly triggered the very clause Daniel created to protect me. Karma sometimes arrives quietly, but it always arrives. I thanked the lawyer and hung up. For the next hour, I sat in silence. Not angry, not crying, just thinking. For years, I believed I was powerless in my own life. But now I understood something. I held the one thing Claire wanted most, and she had already sabotaged her chance to inherit it. That afternoon, my neighbor Evelyn stopped by. She was 71 and had lived next door for almost 20 years. You look different today, Margaret, she said while we drank tea. Different how? Like someone who just discovered a secret. I smiled faintly. Something like that. Evelyn studied me carefully. Does it involve your daughter? I nodded. She squeezed my hand gently. I always wondered how long it would take before you realized Claire was using you. The words stung, but they weren't cruel, just honest. I know now. What are you going to do? For a moment I didn't answer, because the truth was, I hadn't fully decided yet. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore, and fate was about to give me the perfect opportunity. Because 3 days later, my phone rang. Claire. The first call in nearly 3 weeks. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. Mom. Her voice sounded overly sweet, almost rehearsed. How are you? I looked at Daniel's letter sitting on the table. I'm doing fine, Claire. Good. I was thinking we should talk. About what? About the property in Oregon? There it was, the real reason she finally called. Nathan and I spoke with a development company recently, she continued casually. They said the land could sell for a lot of money, maybe even over $1 million. I said nothing. Mom, you're not using the property anyway. It just sits there. Still silent. And honestly, it would make more sense if you transferred ownership to me now, so Nathan can handle the sale process. My fingers tightened around the phone. Claire. Yes? Why were you contacting developers, pretending you had authority over land that doesn't belong to you? Silence exploded across the line. How did you know about that? Because the company called me. Her breathing became uneven. Mom, it was just preliminary research. No, Claire, it was fraud. The word landed heavy. You're exaggerating. Am I? I heard paper shuffling on her side of the line. Nathan says this is perfectly normal. Nathan is not the owner of that land. I am. Claire's voice sharpened instantly. Mom, you're being paranoid. No, I'm finally paying attention. Another silence. Then she said something that confirmed my worst suspicion. Mom, that land was always meant to be mine anyway. The sentence hung between us, like a confession. And in that moment, I realized something devastating. My daughter hadn't just expected my money. She had been waiting for my death. But what Claire didn't know yet was that her attempt to steal the property had already triggered the clause that erased her inheritance forever. And when she found out, the confrontation would tear our family apart. The following Sunday, I drove to Portland. It was a 4-hour trip through endless stretches of evergreen forest and gray sky. For most of the drive, I kept thinking about Claire's words. That land was always meant to be mine anyway. The entitlement behind that sentence echoed louder than any argument we had ever had. By the time I reached Keller and Maddox Legal Group, my mind was clear. I was done being passive. Mr. Daniel Maddox himself met with me. He was a calm man in his early 60s, with silver hair and patient eyes. "Mrs. Holloway," he said after reviewing the trust documents, "I want to be very clear about your situation. Please, your daughter's attempt to negotiate the property without authorization activates the breach clause in your husband's trust, meaning her inheritance rights are legally revoked. The final decision still rests with you, of course. But if you choose to enforce the clause, Claire will never inherit the property. Not after your death. Not ever." I stared at the polished wooden desk. For years, I believed Claire would one day receive that land. That had been Daniel's original intention. But Daniel had also included that protective clause, because he understood something about human nature. Power changes people. "What would you do in my place?" I asked quietly. The lawyer considered the question carefully. "Your husband designed the trust to protect you first. Whatever decision allows you to live peacefully is the correct one." Peace. I hadn't felt real peace in years. I signed several documents that afternoon. Not final ones, just protective measures. The property could no longer be negotiated, listed, or contacted by developers without written confirmation from both the law firm and myself. Claire's access to the land was officially locked down. When I walked out of the office, the cold Oregon air felt strangely refreshing. For the first time in a long time, I felt something growing inside me. Control. But the storm was only beginning. Because 2 days later, Claire showed up at my house unannounced. Her car screeched into the driveway just after sunset. I opened the door before she could knock. "Mom, we need to talk." Her face was pale and furious. "You contacted the lawyers." "Yes." "You had no right to do that without discussing it with me first." I almost laughed. "It's my property." Claire pushed past me into the living room. "Nathan said you're overreacting. Nathan has nothing to do with this." She turned toward me sharply. "That land is part of my future." "No, Claire, it's part of mine." Her eyes flashed with anger. "You're being selfish." The word felt strangely familiar. "You used that word before," I said quietly. "Selfish." Claire folded her arms. "I just don't understand why you're suddenly acting like this." "Because I finally understand something." "What?" "You don't see me as your mother. You see me as an asset." Her mouth opened, but no words came. Then she tried a different tactic. The softer voice. The one she used when she wanted something. "Mom, we're family. We should work together." I stepped closer. Family doesn't secretly try to sell property behind each other's backs. Her expression hardened again. "Nathan said we could get $1 million for that land. You and Dad bought it for almost nothing." "Dad inherited it." Claire waved her hand impatiently. "Exactly. So why not sell it now while the market is good?" I looked straight into her eyes. "Because I'm not dead yet." The words stunned her. For a moment she said nothing. Then she asked the question that revealed everything. "So what are you planning to do with it?" I smiled slightly, for the first time in years. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether my daughter decides she wants a mother, or just an inheritance." Claire's silence told me the answer immediately. But she didn't know the most important thing yet. She didn't know that legally speaking, she had already lost the inheritance forever. And when she finally discovered that truth, her reaction would ignite the biggest confrontation our family had ever seen. After Claire stormed out of my house that evening, the silence she left behind felt heavier than any argument we had ever had. Her car disappeared down the dark road, tires crunching over gravel. I stood on the porch for a long time. The cold air of late November bit at my cheeks, but I barely felt it. Because something inside me had shifted permanently. For decades, I had lived with the quiet belief that my role in the world was to give. Give time, give money, give energy, give love, and accept whatever remained afterward. But Claire's attempt to sell Daniel's land without my knowledge had torn away the last illusion I had been holding on to. My daughter did not simply expect my help. She expected my surrender. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The next morning, however, the storm arrived. My phone rang non-stop. First, Patricia, my younger sister in Idaho. "Margaret, what is going on with Claire?" My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "She called me last night crying. She said you're refusing to help them financially, and now you're threatening to cut her out of the family inheritance." I closed my eyes. The story had already begun to spread. "I'm not threatening anything, Patricia. I'm protecting myself." "Protecting yourself from your own daughter?" I could hear the confusion in her voice. "Claire didn't mention she tried to sell my property behind my back, did she?" There was a long silence. No, of course she hadn't. I explained everything slowly. The emails, the developer call, the trust clause. When I finished, Patricia exhaled softly. "Margaret, I had no idea." "Neither did I until recently." Another pause. Then she said something that stayed with me for the rest of the day. "You know Claire has always believed that land belonged to her, eventually." "Eventually," I repeated. "Yes, after I'm gone." Patricia didn't answer. That silence confirmed what I already feared. Claire had been talking about my death like it was a future investment. By noon, 3 more relatives had called. Each conversation followed the same pattern: confusion, concern, then quiet understanding once they heard the full story. But one call stood out. Nathan. I nearly didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Margout," he began in a smooth voice that reminded me of a salesman. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Oh?" "Claire told me you're upset about the land situation." "Upset is an interesting word for attempted fraud." He chuckled lightly. "No one was committing fraud. We were simply exploring possibilities." "Without telling me." "We assumed you'd appreciate us handling the complicated parts." Handling. The arrogance of that word made my chest tighten. "Nathan," I said slowly, "you and Claire make over $7,000 a month together. So? So stop pretending you need my property to survive." His voice hardened slightly. "This isn't about survival. It's about smart financial planning." "For who?" "For the family." I leaned back in my chair. "You mean for yourselves?" Another pause. "Margaret, families support each other." "Exactly. And support doesn't mean secretly trying to sell someone else's assets." His patience finally cracked. "Look, Claire is very upset right now. She's upset because her plan didn't work." Nathan sighed. "You're overreacting." "No, I'm finally reacting." I hung up before he could say another word. But that conversation confirmed something important. Nathan had been involved from the beginning, which meant Claire hadn't acted alone. 2 days later, I received a letter from Keller and Maddox. Inside were the official documents confirming the breach clause activation. Claire Caldwell was no longer listed as a beneficiary in Daniel Holloway's trust. Legally speaking, she had lost the inheritance she had been waiting for, and she didn't know yet. I sat at the kitchen table, holding that letter while rain tapped against the windows. For a moment, I wondered if I should tell her immediately. But something stopped me. For years, Claire had manipulated the truth. She had twisted stories to make herself the victim. So this time, I decided something different. If she wanted the truth, she could hear it in person. Which is why I called her that evening. Claire answered after 3 rings. "What do you want?" Her tone was cold. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About Daniel's trust." Silence filled the line. "I'm busy." "Claire." "Yes. If you don't come over tomorrow evening, I will have the lawyer send the documents directly to your house. Another long silence. Then she spoke quietly. Fine, I'll come. And when she hung up, I knew something important. The confrontation that had been building for months was finally about to happen. What I didn't know was that Claire was planning to bring someone with her. Someone who would make that conversation explode in ways I never expected. Claire arrived the next evening just after sunset, but she wasn't alone. Nathan stepped out of the passenger seat beside her. The sight of him made my stomach tighten. So this was going to be a team effort. I opened the door before they could knock. Evening, I said calmly. Nathan forced a polite smile. Margaret. Claire walked inside without greeting me. Let's get this over with. Her tone was impatient, as if she were attending a meeting she didn't want to be at. We sat at the dining table, the same table where Claire had done homework as a child, where Daniel used to drink coffee before work. Strange how the same place could hold such different memories. I placed the envelope from the law firm on the table. Claire glanced at it suspiciously. What is that? The consequence of your actions. Nathan leaned forward. Margaret, I think we should all calm down before making any rash decisions. I slid the documents toward them. You should read it first. Claire unfolded the pages quickly. At first, her expression remained neutral. Then her eyebrows pulled together. Then her face turned pale. What is this? The breach clause in Daniel's trust. Nathan reached for the papers. His confident expression slowly drained away as he read. This can't be right. It is. Claire's voice rose sharply. You activated this clause? No, you did. Her eyes snapped toward me. What are you talking about? Your attempt to negotiate the land sale triggered it automatically. Nathan stood up suddenly. That's ridiculous. It's legal. Claire shook her head rapidly. No, Dad would never cut me out of the inheritance. Dad didn't. You did. She slammed the papers onto the table. This is insane. For the first time in the entire conversation, my voice rose slightly. You tried to sell land that wasn't yours. You lied to developers. You manipulated me for years. And now you're shocked that actions have consequences? Claire stared at me like she was looking at a stranger. You're punishing me. No, I'm protecting myself. Nathan tried another tactic. Margaret, we can fix this. How? If you simply sign a transfer agreement before the trust updates are finalized, the property could still pass to Claire. I laughed softly. You still think this conversation is about money? Claire's eyes filled with anger. Of course it's about money. Everything always has been. That sentence echoed through the room like a confession. I leaned forward. For you, maybe, but not for me. Claire pushed her chair back. I can't believe you're doing this to your own daughter. I held her gaze. I can't believe my own daughter tried to sell my future while I was still alive. Silence filled the room. Finally, Nathan grabbed Claire's arm. Let's go. They walked toward the door. Before leaving, Claire turned around. You're going to regret this. Maybe. But I regret something more. What? Waiting 63 years to finally say no. The door slammed behind them. Their car roared down the street seconds later. I stood alone in the quiet house. My hands were shaking. But deep down, I felt something stronger than fear. Freedom. Because for the first time in my life, I had stopped living for someone else's expectations. And the most unexpected twist of all was still waiting ahead, because 6 months later, a stranger would knock on my door with news about Claire that would change everything again. 6 months passed without a single word from Claire. Winter in Spokane arrived quietly that year. Snow covered the rooftops like soft white blankets, and the streets grew quiet in the early evenings. Inside my small house, something unfamiliar had begun to grow. Peace. It came slowly. At first, I didn't trust it. For years, my days had revolved around Claire's needs. Her calls, her emergencies, her demands disguised as family obligations. Without those interruptions, My schedule felt strangely empty. But emptiness eventually became space, and space became freedom. I fixed the roof that had leaked for 2 years. A contractor named Miguel replaced the damaged beams and sealed the attic before the first heavy snow. The first night it rained after the repair, I stood in my bedroom listening carefully. No dripping, no bucket, just silence. That simple silence felt like a victory. I also started doing something I had forgotten how to do, seeing friends. Evelyn dragged me to a weekly book club at the public library. At first I resisted. I hadn't read a novel in years that wasn't interrupted by babysitting or cleaning someone else's kitchen. But sitting with other women my age, talking about stories and life, reminded me that I still existed outside the role of mother. My health improved too. My blood pressure dropped, I slept deeper. And every once in a while, when I walked past the mirror in the hallway, I noticed something surprising. I looked younger. Not physically, maybe, but lighter. One evening in early spring, I was watering the small garden behind my house when Evelyn called over the fence. "Margaret?" "Yes?" "Have you heard anything about Claire?" The question made my chest tighten slightly. "No, why?" Evelyn hesitated. "I ran into someone from Seattle today. They mentioned Nathan's company closed down a few months ago." I froze. Closed down? Apparently the business failed. Something about debts and investors pulling out. I said nothing. Evelyn studied my face carefully. "Are you all right?" I nodded slowly. Yes. But the truth was more complicated. Because part of me felt sad. Not because Claire lost money, but because I knew exactly what she would do next. She would look for someone to blame. And for most of her life, that someone had been me. 2 weeks later, the knock finally came. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I opened the door expecting a package delivery. Instead, a young woman stood on the porch, wearing a gray coat and holding a leather folder. "Mrs. Holloway?" "Yes." "My name is Andrea Collins. I'm an attorney representing Claire Caldwell." The words hit like a sudden gust of cold wind. Claire had sent a lawyer. "Please come in," I said quietly. Andrea stepped inside and sat at the kitchen table. She spoke with careful professionalism. "Mrs. Holloway, your daughter has asked me to discuss the possibility of resolving the property dispute regarding the Oregon land." Property dispute. I almost smiled. There is no dispute. Andrea opened her folder. "Claire believes the trust clause was activated unfairly and would like to negotiate a settlement." "What kind of settlement?" "Perhaps transferring a portion of the property or financial compensation equivalent to its value." I leaned back in my chair. "So my daughter wants me to pay her for land she tried to steal." Andrea cleared her throat. "She believes she has moral claim as your only child." Moral claim. The irony of that phrase hung in the air. "Mrs. Collins," I said calmly, "do you know why that clause exists? I've read the documents. My husband created it to protect me from exactly this situation." Andrea nodded. "Claire insists she acted in good faith. Good faith would have included asking permission before contacting developers." Another silence settled over the table. Finally, the lawyer asked quietly, "Would you consider reconciliation with your daughter if certain conditions were met?" That question lingered in the air longer than any legal argument, because the truth was painful. The problem between Claire and me had never been about money. It had always been about respect. And respect cannot be negotiated like property. I folded my hands on the table. "Tell Claire something for me." Andrea looked up. "Yes? If she wants a relationship with her mother, she can come talk to me herself, not through lawyers. And if she wants my land, the answer is no." Andrea closed her folder slowly. "I understand." Before leaving, she added one final sentence. "Mrs. Holloway, I think your daughter expected a very different response." I smiled faintly. So did I. After she left, I stood by the window watching her car drive away. The past was still knocking at my door. But this time, I didn't feel afraid, because I had already survived the hardest part. Learning that sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones you once loved the deepest. And just when I thought the story with Claire had finally reached its end, life delivered one final twist I never could have predicted. One that would arrive on a quiet Sunday morning. The knock came early, 8:30 on a Sunday morning. Sunlight had barely begun filtering through the kitchen curtains when I heard it. I assumed it was Evelyn again. She often stopped by for coffee without warning. But when I opened the door, I saw someone I hadn't expected to see again. Claire. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked different, thinner. Her hair pulled back loosely, dark circles under her eyes. Behind her stood two familiar figures, Evan and Luke, my grandsons. They had grown. Evan was nearly as tall as Claire now. Luke clutched a backpack nervously. "Grandma," Evan said quietly. My heart stumbled. "Hello, sweetheart." Claire avoided my eyes. "Can we come in?" I stepped aside. They entered slowly. The boys moved toward the living room, while Claire remained standing near the door. The tension in the room was thick enough to feel. Finally, she spoke. "Nathan left." The words came out flat. I nodded once. "I heard the company closed." It did. And after that, everything else collapsed. Debt, arguments, lawyers. She exhaled slowly. He blamed me for everything. I didn't respond, because part of me suspected that story contained more truth than she realized. Claire looked around the kitchen. The new cabinets, the repaired ceiling, the clean walls. "You fixed the house." "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Looks nice." Another long silence stretched between us. Then Claire said something that surprised me. "Mom, I handled things badly." Badly was an understatement, but it was still the closest thing to an apology she had ever offered. I waited. She continued. "I thought if we sold the land, it would solve everything. Money problems, the business, our future. And when you said no," her voice faded. "You panicked." "Yes." The honesty in that single word caught me off guard. Claire rubbed her hands together nervously. "Nathan always said that property would eventually belong to us anyway, so it didn't feel like stealing. It felt like speeding up the process, speeding up my death." She flinched at the bluntness. "I didn't think about it that way." "Exactly." Claire's eyes glistened for a moment. The boys peeked into the kitchen. "Are we staying long?" Luke asked. Claire forced a smile. "Go sit down." They disappeared again. Claire looked back at me. "I know the inheritance is gone." "Yes. I'm not here about that." I studied her carefully. "Then why are you here?" Her answer came softly. "Because the boys asked about you. And because I finally realized something." "What?" She looked straight into my eyes for the first time since arriving. "You stopped being my safety net, and without it, everything fell apart." I waited. She swallowed. "I guess that means I never learned how to stand on my own." The admission hung quietly between us, and in that moment I saw something unfamiliar in my daughter's face. Not entitlement, not anger. Something closer to humility. But humility alone could not repair years of damage. The real question still lingered unspoken. Whether our family could ever rebuild what had been broken. And the answer to that question would depend on one final choice I had yet to make. For a long moment after Claire finished speaking, neither of us moved. The house felt unusually quiet. In the living room, I could hear the faint sound of Luke flipping through television channels, while Evan whispered something to him. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds. But for me, they carried years of memories. Saturday mornings baking pancakes, tiny shoes left by the door, sticky fingerprints on my windows. Those moments had once been the center of my world, and then they had disappeared. Claire stood across from me, waiting. Her shoulders looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally. I gestured toward the chair. "Sit down." She obeyed slowly. For the first time in months, we were sitting at the same table, without anger filling the room. I folded my hands. Claire, do you understand why everything changed between us? She nodded slightly. Because I tried to sell the land. That was part of it. She looked up. What was the other part? Because you stopped seeing me as a person. You started seeing me as a solution. To your bills, your problems, your plans. Her eyes lowered. I know, but saying those words is easier than understanding them. For years, you never asked if I could afford what you asked for. You never wondered what it cost me. I paused, letting the silence sit. When was the last time you asked how I was doing? Claire didn't answer, because she couldn't, and that silence told the truth. I continued quietly. You remember the bucket in my bedroom catching rainwater? She nodded. I lived like that for 2 years while helping pay your mortgage. Claire closed her eyes briefly. I didn't know it was that bad. You didn't ask. The words weren't cruel, just honest. From the living room, Evan called out, Grandma, do you still have that old chessboard? I smiled faintly. Yes, it's in the cabinet. He disappeared down the hallway looking for it. Claire watched him go. They missed you. I missed them too. That was the hardest part of everything, losing the boys. But protecting myself meant accepting that loss. Claire leaned forward. Mom, I can't change what I did. No, but you can decide who you become next. She looked confused. What do you mean? I stood and walked to the kitchen window. Snow was beginning to fall outside again. Small white flakes drifting slowly through the gray sky. When Daniel created that trust, he wasn't trying to punish you. He was trying to protect me. Claire remained silent. You broke that protection, and the inheritance is gone. She nodded. I know. But inheritance was never the real problem. I turned back toward her. The real problem was that you forgot how families are supposed to work. They support each other, not exploit each other. Claire's eyes filled with tears she didn't quite let fall. I don't expect you to forgive me. Forgiveness isn't something you ask for once. It's something you earn, over time. Another long silence settled between us. Finally, she asked quietly, What happens now? I looked toward the living room where my grandsons were arguing about chess pieces. Now we start small. What does that mean? It means if you want a relationship with me, it has to be a real one. Not built on money, not built on guilt, just honesty. Claire nodded slowly. I can try. Trying was a beginning, not a guarantee, but a beginning. Evan appeared in the doorway, holding the chessboard. Grandma, are you playing with us or not? I laughed softly. I'm coming. Claire watched as I walked toward the living room. For the first time in a long time, we were all in the same house again. Not because someone needed something, but because maybe, just maybe, something broken was trying to heal. And whether it succeeded or failed, I knew one thing for certain. I would never disappear inside someone else's life again. Not even my daughter's. 1 year passed after that Sunday morning. Life didn't magically fix itself overnight. Healing never works that way. It happens slowly, quietly, sometimes painfully. But it happens. Claire and I began rebuilding something that resembled a relationship, not the one we used to have. That version had been built on imbalance, on expectations that crushed one person while benefiting another. Instead, we built something new, something smaller, but healthier. Claire found a job managing a small office for a construction company in Tacoma. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. But for the first time in her adult life, she was supporting herself without leaning on me. The first time she paid her own rent entirely with her own salary, she called me. Not to ask for money, just to tell me. And that small moment meant more to me than any apology ever could. The boys started visiting every other weekend. Evan loved chess. Luke preferred helping me in the garden. Watching them grow reminded me that time moves forward, whether we are ready or not. And sometimes the best gift you can give your family isn't sacrifice. It's boundaries. The Oregon land remained untouched, quiet, covered in trees and wind and history. Sometimes I drove there during summer. I would sit beneath the tall pines Daniel once showed me and listen to the sound of the forest. That land had nearly torn my family apart, but it had also forced the truth into the open. And truth, even painful truth, is better than living inside illusions. Claire never asked about selling it again. Not once. One evening, she said something that stayed with me. "Mom, Dad gave that land to protect you." I nodded. Yes. Then maybe the best way to honor him is to leave it exactly like it is. I smiled. For once, we agreed. Now when I look back at everything that happened, I don't see it as revenge. I see it as awakening. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is not fight harder. It's simply stop allowing themselves to be used. If you are listening to my story right now and something in it feels familiar, maybe you've been the one sacrificing. Maybe you've been the one carrying everyone else. Maybe someone in your life expects your love to come with endless payment. If that's true, remember something important. Love should never require you to disappear. Your life has value. Your time has value. You have the right to exist as more than someone else's solution. And if my story meant something to you, take a moment to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes the stories we tell are the reminders we all need that it is never too late to take your life back.